Hey, what's up everyone? It's Caleb and this is your video on MongoDB. MongoDB is classified as a NoSQL database, and that essentially means it allows you to easily store unstructured data. If you don't know what any of that mumbo jumbo is, then this is the video for you, and by the end of this, you will be a pro. So there are no SQL databases, but there's also the classification of relational databases. This is probably the database you're used to if you've worked with databases. This would be MySQL, SQL Server, and so forth. With a relational database, everything is forced to fit within a table structure. With an unstructured database, you're not tied to this structure, so you're able to have a very flexible data structure. This video, we're going to be using MongoDB Atlas, which is the software as a service version of MongoDB, and this is going to free us from a lot of the responsibilities we might have if we installed this database locally. So with MongoDB Atlas, you're not going to have to worry about configuring new environments, setting up security controls, manually creating backups, and debugging slow queries. All these things are going to be taken care of for you. Ew. Gross. Okay. MongoDB also has numerous other features that'll make your life a lot easier. All right, go away. Now, before we get started, there are two capabilities about MongoDB Atlas that I wanted to share with you. The first is the Performance Advisor. What this is going to do is it's going to look at any queries that are considered slow. By default, it's 100 milliseconds or more, and it's going to give you suggested indexes to improve the query performance. The second thing is that there's an automated queryable backup system. So you're going to have these snapshots of your data over time. You can query these, compare them, and restore sections of different snapshots into the present. So those are just a couple cool things I wanted to call out, but enough sitting around. Let's jump in and get started. To get started with MongoDB, you'll want to go to cloud.mongodb.com. And then if you don't have an account, click register. Once you have an account, just click login. Now, if it's your first time, you might get a guided step-by-step process, but I'm going to teach you what to do so you can just follow along. We're going to build a cluster. Now, setting this up is a free process, but of course you can go to a paid tier if you need a little bit more oomph. There's also a lot of different capabilities with the paid tier. So for example, inside of this additional settings, you can see some of these possibilities. So if any of these things seem like something you might need, then you might want to consider upgrading by going into the cluster tier and choosing exactly what you need. The default will work for us, so we're just going to click create cluster. But before you do that, you might want to change the name. So you can go in here and say anything you want. We'll just go with my cluster. And then click create cluster. All right, so this is going to take a couple minutes. So in the meantime, what you want to do is go to database access on the left here, and we're going to create a new user. Now this is a database user. This is different than your Atlas user used to log into this platform here. So this is what we're going to use to connect to our database. So give it a username and a secure password. And read and write is fine. We can click add user. Awesome, so we have that user created. Then on network access on the left, we're going to whitelist an IP address. So this is going to allow us to connect to our cluster. So what we want to do on the right, click add IP address, and here you can click add current IP address. You also have the option to allow access from anywhere. That's not going to restrict anybody from connecting to your cluster. Although that might be useful for testing sake, it's not recommended in a production environment. So once you got that IP address in there, you can click confirm. And now we should just have to wait on our cluster and we're good to go. Awesome, so once your cluster is ready to go, you can go in here, click it. Here are your different nodes of this cluster. You can click collections to see your different collections. We'll get into that in just a second. We actually haven't created any. So what you can do is you can load a sample data set or you can add your own data. I'm going to teach you guys how to do that with another tool, which is actually called MongoDB Compass. This is the GUI tool for MongoDB. There's also the CLI tool, the Mongo Shell, which we're going to be getting into a little bit in this video as well. So you can click this if you want, otherwise go back to your clusters and click connect. Here you can see there are three real options for connecting to your cluster. The first one I mentioned is MongoDB Compass. This is your visual tool. It's the easiest to get started with. Then I would recommend the Mongo Shell. Those are the two tools we're going to cover in this video. I recommend starting with Compass because it's really easy to get started, and then switching to the shell is a piece of cake. So let's start with Compass, and now you're going to want to choose the appropriate operating system. So for example, I'm on Mac, so I can click that and click download. Now installing that should be pretty easy. Once you do that, you're going to want to open it, but do it with this connection string copied. That's going to make connecting to our cluster a whole lot easier. Now when you open MongoDB Compass, what you're going to do is click this connect to. When this finishes loading, it'll say that it detected a connection string, click yes, and then all you have to do is provide the user password. Great, and then click connect. Simple as that, we've connected to our cluster and we can start working with it. So inside of our cluster, we actually have to create a database. So we create database, and we're going to need a database and a collection. Inside of MongoDB, a collection is essentially a table. It's to store related information. So for the database, we can say my app. For the collection, we can say users. Click create database. Now we can see this database. We can open that, select our collection, and see the data. Obviously, there's nothing here. So the easiest thing to do is click insert document. It's a little small, so I'm going to zoom in, insert document. And here is where we create our first document. Over on the right, these are our different data types to define the type of data we want to store for that particular field. Now, each entry into our collection is known as a document. This is essentially a row in a traditional relational database system. But each document is not tied to a particular structure, so every single one can have a different structure. You can see that we start with an ID in here. This is completely changeable, but it is recommended that we stick with that ID and we just add stuff to it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add some fields such as name. We'll give this person the name Amy. We'll create a status and we'll say gold. And you can see these are both strings. That means it's just a sequence of characters inside of quotes. We have the opportunity to use other data types such as arrays. Arrays will give you a collection of data. These are ordered and they each have an index, so this one's index 0. So what kind of data are we going to put in this array? Well, you can actually define that using this key over here. For example, we could say interests. Let's say this is some kind of social network where people can say what they're interested in. We'll go in here and say this person's interested in news and sports. When you press enter, it's going to go down to the next key. If you don't want that, just click the X, and you can click this little plus up here and say add field after interest. That'll bring you down here. So that is how you create a document. That should be good for us for now. I'm going to get rid of this last one and we click insert. And there we go. We have a very simple document, nothing too crazy. Then what we can do is we can actually clone this document just to show that it doesn't have to be the exact same structure. For example, we can go and add a field after interest. We could say something like extra stuff, something really unique and creative, and just put whatever we want in there. It doesn't really matter. Let's say we're going to put a double in here. We'll just say 7.7. Insert. And you can see we can put whatever we want. There's no strict structure on what kind of data we can put in this collection. Now, when you want to edit a document on the right, you just want to click this little pencil, and you can see the process of this. When you add something, it's going to become green. So if I click this plus, it's going to be green. And every time we add something, it becomes green. If we edit something, it turns yellow. So if we change their name to Sally, it becomes yellow. Status, we can just get rid of that, it becomes red. Once we got all the changes we want, we can click update, and those changes become committed. You also have the capability to import data, so putting in a ton of data like this might take a while. So what we can do is we can go to collection, import data, and put a JSON file. JSON is just a notation for representing objects, so you can have a JSON file which will have a bunch of data in it. For example, if you go to a web browser and go to bit.ly/data.json, press enter, this will come up to this drive document, which you can then download. And if you look at this, you can see what JSON looks like. It's a little messy, but it does have a lot of information in here. Now what we can do is we can go back to Compass, find that file, data.json, open, click import, and boom, all this data gets added into our collection. So the original two that were added in here, we can just delete those, and now we have some organized data. So taking a look at this data, it's similar to what we had, but now we have an interests and a groups, and these are both arrays. When you expand them, you can see something interesting. This groups is actually an array of objects, and objects are essentially nested documents, so you can expand this object and see the structure. So you can nest data using arrays or objects. The main difference is that arrays are ordered using these indexes, and objects are just key value pairs. Now, looking at all this data in this list view can get a little old because it's hard to see how everything's structured. So what you can do is you can actually click this table view, and this is going to put it into a table as best as possible. And if for some reason a certain document has a different data type for a field, so for example, let's say we change this name from John to a number and then press enter, Well, now you can see it's a mixed data type, so it can't no longer tell you what data type the column is. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that back to a name, so we'll go in here and change it to a string. Right there, change that to John, get that back to normal. Alright, so that's the basics of visualizing your data. Now what I want to talk about is how to query your data. So we're going to go back to the list view for this, and what we're going to do is we're going to expand this options, and here is where you can define some queries. So the first thing, why would you want to query your data? Well, right now we only have 6 documents, so it's really easy to see everything. But imagine if we had hundreds of thousands of documents and everything had a different value for different fields, and it was just not nearly as organized as we had it right here. Well, we might want to search through this data to find a particular document, and we don't want to have to manually look and see every single one ourselves. We want the database to do that, so that's where the queries come in. We can be specific about what kind of data we're looking for. To see a simple example of this, all you have to do is inside of curly braces, say last name, put a colon, and then inside of double quotes or single quotes, you can put a value. So we could say last name Curry and click find. This is going to filter through all of our data and grab anyone with the last name valued Curry. And you can see there's 2 entries here. We have Caleb Curry and Kayla Curry. So that's a very simple query, but just to get a little bit more practice, let's look at some other simple ones. We could check if the account is verified by saying verified having the value true and click find. So I'm assuming this verified refers to whether their email has been verified or not. So this returns 4 documents, which means there's about 2 people that do not have verified emails. If you want to see those, you could just say verified is false. And there you go. We see that Kayla is not verified and Jerry is not verified. So this is a query you might do if you're trying to basically email anyone with an unverified email and say, hey, make sure you verify your email. Don't forget. Well, this is the kind of query that could do something like that. Now, another cool thing is even if something is an array, such as interests, you can do it the same way. Let's see if we can find everyone interested in dogs. So we'll just say interest, and then for the value, we just use a string and say dogs. Find, and you can see everyone here has dogs inside of their interests. You can see it's there, and there. Now for more complex queries, you might run into something known as a query selector, and I'm going to show you an example of that now. So what we're going to do is clear out these curly braces, and let's say we're trying to find all the users interested in dogs and coding. Well, what you do is you would say interest, like normal, put a colon, but instead of just putting the value here, what you're going to do is you're going to put another object. So curly braces. Inside these curly braces, you're going to use a $all, then put a colon, then put an array, which is the square brackets. Now we can put all of the values that we want in here. So we can say dogs, comma, coding. Now that's a lot more complicated. Click find, and you can see the only person that shows up is Kayla Curry, which has dogs and coding. Now we can do a similar thing if we wanted to say anyone interested in dogs or animals. So to do that, let's go back to the filter. And if you don't want to have to type everything out, you can actually go to these 3 bars and click toggle query history and click that one, and it's going to pop up right here. Get rid of that. And all we have to do is instead of using all, we can just say in. This is basically or, dogs or coding. Find. And now if we look through the interests, you can see dogs and coding conveniently. This one's just coding. This one's just dogs. This one's coding. And this one is dogs. So that is how you would do an OR operator. Now when we're working with arrays, we can easily search through those values. When we're working with objects, it's a little bit different. So for example, let's say we're wanting to search inside the groups and find anyone inside of the group NYC News. What would this look like? It's going to look like this. We're going to get rid of everything, and then we're going to say groups dot name. So we're basically traversing into groups and then the name, but we actually have to put this inside of quotes for this to work. So quotes, then a colon, and then the value we're looking for, NYC News, find, and looking inside of groups, we have NYC News, NYC News, and NYC News. So in order to do the dot notation, you have to use the quotes. All right, let's try another query. This time we're going to use the AND query selector, and this is what it's going to look like. We're going to start with an object and say and and then a colon. And this time we can look for people that might be verified and be interested in a particular thing. So we can use two different fields. So let's say the person is verified and interested in news. And Caleb Curry will show up, but Kayla should not show up because she's verified false and she's interested in news. So the way this works is we need to give it an array, and inside of this array, we're going to give it a series of objects inside of curly braces. So the first one we could say verified is true, and then the next object, separated by commas, we can say interest, and the value will be news. Find, and you can see two things show up. We got Caleb, he's verified true, and he's interested in news. Then we have John, verified true, interested in news. If we wanted to see Kayla, we could switch verified from true to false, click find, and there you go. Kayla, she's verified false, and she's interested in news. So you can see the queries can get a little bit more complex than just one little thing, and these query selectors are definitely going to come in handy, and there's lots of them that you might want to go study up on. The next thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was this project here. What this will do is this will decide whether a field shows up or not. So for example, inside of an object, we can say email 0, and that'll get rid of the email field altogether. So when you say 0, it gets rid of it. If you say 1, it's going to only show that one, with the exception to the ID, which will always be shown here, unless we specifically get rid of it. So for example, we could say underscore ID, set it to 0. And there it goes away. So 1 to make it the only thing shown up, and then 0 to get rid of that specific field. So if we wanted first name, last name, we could say first name 1, last name 1, and then we could say ID 0 to get rid of that. Now we have Kayla Curry. The next thing on this list is sort, and this will basically sort the documents that are returned. So let's reset just to get everything back to normal, and we can work with sort. So what we can do in here is we can say what we want to sort by. Let's say verified, and we'll set this to 1. 1 is ascending. So ascending is from least to greatest. And when we're talking about Booleans, false is 0 and true is 1. So when we're going from least to greatest, the false is going to show up first, and then the trues. If we're doing a string, for example, it's going to do it alphabetically. So instead of verified, let's do last name, and we're going from Curry to George to Grape, Jones, Smith, and you can see it's going from C to S. If we want it the other way, we actually use a -1, and this is descending. So in this situation, Smith is going to be at the top and Curry at the bottom. Now sometimes just sorting by one field is not enough. For example, if you look at Curry here, you can see Kayla and Caleb both have that last name, so we need to decide which one's going to come first. So in this situation, we could sort by verified and make it ascending, so then Kayla should come up at top because it's false, which will be a 0. So we'll say verified, and then we'll say 1, find. Everything should be the same, but now Kayla is ahead of Caleb. So that's how to sort. The only other things on here is collation, which deals with string comparisons for different regions. Skip can be used to skip a couple of documents. So for example, you could do this for pagination. In this case, we'll just skip the first 2 documents, click find, and you can see now it only returns 4 because it skipped those first 2. You can also limit the number of documents, so if you wanted to return 3, you can click find, and now there's only 3 documents that are returned. So it skipped the first 2, and then it returned the next 3, and that last one's cut off. So that is everything you need to know for the basics of querying. Now we're going to be talking about using the Mongo shell. All you gotta do is click connect, and then connect with Mongo shell. Now the process for doing this is gonna be different on Windows, Mac, or Ubuntu. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through the process with Mac, and you can see it teaches you how to install via Homebrew. So inside of a terminal, you can see if you have brew installed by typing brew. You can see we get a bunch of junk, so that means it's installed. If you don't have it installed, you can go to brew.sh and you can install it using this command right here. So copy that, paste that into your console, and install it. Once you got it installed, go back to MongoDB Atlas, copy this install via Homebrew, and paste that into the terminal. All right, there you go. We got it installed. Now if we go back to Atlas, we can get our connection string, so we can copy this. Go back to our terminal and paste it. It's going to ask us for a password, our MongoDB password, not our Atlas password. Type that in and you get a bunch of junk that pops up. At this point, you can clear the screen using the command cls. That'll give you a nice fresh start. To see what database you're using, you can say DB, and you can see it says test, which is not what we want. We want to use the database we created. So what you do is just say use, and then say your database, which mine was called my app, and then it says switch to DB my app. And now we can start working with this database. There is a series of syntax you're gonna have to familiarize yourself with, but it shouldn't be too hard once you understand the concepts of collections, documents, and so forth. So for example, if we want to insert a document, all you do is say DB. So you say users, and then you say insert, and you say insert one, and then inside of parentheses. Then in here, this is going to take an object, and you can put whatever you want in here. So for example, you could say name, and give it the value Caleb. All right, now when you press enter, it's going to return an object ID. So everything you insert into this collection is going to have an object ID. Switching over to Compass, you can go back to this collection and you can actually visually see this real easily. Scrolling down here, you can see the object right there. So if you want to know how to do the syntax for something a little bit more complex, maybe like this, all you gotta do is click this copy button here on the right and paste that into a text editor. For example, we're in notes here, you can paste that, and that's the JSON syntax. If you need something a little bit more pretty, you can take that and you can put it in JSON lint. JSON lint can be used to practice your JSON skills. You can paste it in there and click validate, and boom, it's gonna make it nice and pretty. And it says valid JSON down there. So if you're gonna work inside the MongoDB shell, you're going to want to familiarize yourself with basic JSON. So for example, we have keys on the left and then values on the right. And then the two ways to nest data is with arrays. Arrays are the square brackets, and objects are the curly braces with key value pairs inside of them. So yeah, that's JSON. You can practice that if you'd like. You can also just copy it from MongoDB Compass and it'll start to become second nature with time. Now, if you want this data to show up inside of the MongoDB shell, all you gotta do is say db.users.find and press enter, and there's all of our data, but it's super ugly and super hard to read. So what we need to do is we need to append another method to this, and that's going to be pretty. And there we go. That's going to prettify our data, and that's another way you can see the JSON data there. So scrolling up, you can see all the data we've inserted. Now you can use the up arrow keys to get the previous executed command, and inside of the parentheses, you can put extra data to be specific about what you want to return. This is essentially like using the query bar inside a Compass. So we can pass in an object to this find method, and what we could do is we could say verified, and we can demand the value be true. Now, scrolling through this, everybody's going to have verified true. There's one, there's another, whoops, there's another, and there is another. So it returned 4 results, which is the same number that we got when we were working with Compass. So you can see how it works, really simple. We could also do interest. So for example, we could say interest is dogs. That's going to return everyone with the interest of dogs. It's a little actually easier to read inside of here because you don't have to expand each one. You can just scroll up and see those values. So if you want to do some sorting, that's actually another method. So after we find the data, we want to sort the data. And so it's going to look like this. And then inside a sort, we can just pass the object of how we want to sort this. So we could say, let's sort by first name ascending. So at the top is the A's, and then at the bottom is the Z's. So we're going to have Renee at the bottom, and then scrolling up, we're going to find. Now the reason Kayla is at the top is because we still have that filter on here, so we're still looking for those interested in dogs. My person, Caleb Curry, does not have interested in dogs, which is why that person did not show up. So if I got rid of that altogether, Caleb should be at the top. So scrolling up, you can see I am right there. Number 1, oh yeah, until I make this descending. Then I'll be last, which is totally fine with me. All right, there I am. So that is the basics of working with the MongoDB shell. Obviously, we just scratched the surface, but at least now you know how to start working with data by putting data in, getting data back out. Now you can go look at the references and you'll have at least a little bit of an idea of how things work. Next thing you might want to figure out is how to update data, how to delete data, and look into doing stuff like aggregations, study a little bit on indexes, and so forth. Now I'm looking into creating some more MongoDB videos, so let me know the topics you guys would be interested in, and hopefully this introduction has been tremendously helpful. Now every time I have to make a video, I have to turn my air conditioner off, and because it makes so much noise, right? And I'm sweating to death, so I think I'm going to call it quits here, and I'll see you guys back in the real world. So that's all I have to say about MongoDB in this video. I hope to come up with some new content on working with MongoDB inside of a programming language and all kinds of other stuff. So let me know what you guys want to see. Leave a comment in the section below. Let me know what you liked about this video and what you'd like to see in the upcoming stuff. So that's all, and be sure to subscribe. Peace out. Good? Cool.